What's up, guys? I'm Shawnthebro. We are here today for an episode that's a little bit different than usual. This time we're going to be making an EKG slash oscillator in Unreal Engine. So we're going to be making the material and then being able to apply it to the HUD so that you can see what you see above. Yours will probably be a little bit better than mine if you make a better texture, but I'm not very good at art, so that's what we got to go off of. So let's start. We only need two things today. We need a material, and we're going to need the texture to base the material from. And then the rest of it is going to be all done in this material instance, or the material itself, and we'll make a material instance to display to the HUD. So to start, I will show you my material. Okay, here it is right here. It's the basic EKG material. So this right here is the texture that I used. This is the EKG sample 2. That is what is being displayed right now on the screen and colored, as you can see here. So how I made this texture was as simple as drawing this line in any sort of drawing program that allows you to export it as a PNG. I personally use GameMaker Studio, but there's no real reason to do that. It's just because I'm really comfortable with the way GameMaker Studio works and exports, because I've been using it for a long time, way longer than I was using Unreal. So I just literally drew a line, and this is what it looked like. If you want this line to be fluid, you're going to want the start and end position to be the same, so try and get them as close as you can. The rest will, just as long as it's a left to right motion, it will work for this. It will draw the line properly and color it properly like you saw. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click and make a new material. You'll see I tried a bunch of different ones. I got close with this one and then finally nailed it with the last one. So if you go to your material that you just made, you're going to have nothing but this end node here. Since we want it on the HUD because we're doing a Resident Evil style health indicator, specifically the Resident Evil 2 remake, we're going to want to use this on a HUD, which means we're going to want it to be part of the user interface. So without even clicking on anything, if you just look at your details panel in the bottom left here, this should be on surface. Make sure you switch it to user interface if you want to use this in your HUD. And for the blend mode, I believe it goes to mask by default, but if it doesn't, you're probably going to want that. So, to get started, we need 3 parts to actually make this work, and then a 4th part to make it look fancy. The first part we need is actually this bottom part here, which is to define the section of the texture to use. What this part does is essentially take the texture that we made and import it into Unreal, and it actually makes it so that this part that we choose within these bounds is the thing that's displayed here. So for example, this kind of sets up the positioning with the height and width too, but my width just happened to be smaller than this, so it goes for 3 of these. If you have a bigger width, you'll probably want to do the same thing here and set a max height or a max width. That way, if it goes too long, you can cut it down. But again, I didn't have that issue, so all I needed was a max height, because you'll see if you don't, mine would have 3 by 3, and we obviously don't want 3 down. We just want to have one solid line. What we're going to want to do is take some values. The height scale and the max height are basically the value that you want to allow to be seen on the height. So for me, 0.58 was the highest value that did not give me any overhang from the other lines. And what I mean by that is if I make this 1, you'll see that this zooms, this height is just one massive line. Well, we wanted a few more than that. I didn't exactly want 3. So I figured, like 2.5, so 0.58 for me. You could also make this like 0.33. And you would get a bunch more. I only wanted, somewhere in the middle there. So that's the value that I chose, but feel free to mess with that. A lot of this is going to be messing with it to see what you like the most. The height scale I just kept as 1 because, I want it to be 1 of its current height. I don't want to make it any taller or shorter. I called this scalar height percent to keep because what this does is determine how much you want to see of that max height. So if I made this 0.8, you're going to see it keeps almost the entire height of the texture of that 3x3. We don't want it to do that, of course. As I was just saying, we want the one line. So we want the height scale to be 1, and then we only want to keep 0.3 of that. There are plenty of different ways to do this, so you can change it however you would like. And we're just going to do a generate band on this multiply. Multiplying these two things together gets you your max height, and then multiplying it by the height percent to keep gets you your resulting value here. This generate band function does exactly what it says, procedurally generates a horizontal or vertical band from the default texture coordinates. This kind of deals with both the actual coloring of the line here. It doesn't change its color, but you see how it's going from light to dark. You'll see this in 3 different spots. We use that for this discoloration, so kind of the fade effect that you're seeing. I just use this to keep the width because if I don't use the multiply on the max height and height percent to keep, you'll see that you're going to have some overhang. It is centered properly because the height scale and max height is working, but since we're not choosing how much to keep, you're going to see this. This is from the one above it, and this is from the one below it. You don't need to put anything else in. You could put in the sharpness, which would make this brightness a little bit brighter. It would make it a little bit sharper as it is. But that's it for this. We do have 2 nodes that are going to other things, but you don't really need to know about that until we get there, which we'll do right now. So zoom into the texture is this next part. So not only do we want to choose how big we want this to be in the space, but then also how close we are to it. So if you change the scale, you can make it something really small. You'll see that we zoom out really far and the texture repeats many, many times. You don't want to do that, so, or maybe you do. So if you do that. I just wanted one line. So 0.7 was the one that worked for me. Depending on the size of your texture and the section that you defined, this could be a different value. But the zoom scale is basically, all of these are just variables. I just called them whatever. The number in parentheses is the value for it. So these are scalar parameters. So if you right click and type in scalar parameter. The texture coordinate here is basically like your world offset position. I don't know if I can see it. Yeah, it's like your world position here. The reason it's a texture coordinate 0 is because that's what it defaults to when you're using a user interface as your material domain. And we have to use that to make it work with UI, or at least that's the only way I know how to make it work with a HUD. So don't get confused about this. This is just your world position essentially, and it's the first texture coordinate on wherever it's being rendered. So you won't have to change anything with this. If it doesn't pop up by default, because you might have a absolute world position in your material by default, depending on what version of Unreal you're using, you can just type in texture coordinate and you'll get that. This next part, I had a lot of help from my friend Joel. So I'm not entirely sure if I'm explaining this right, but basically what this is doing is this is zooming in, as we talked about. Then we're taking the position that we're at on the screen and adding that to where we want to be zoomed to, dividing that by the zoom scale to get us just this area that we zoomed into, and then adding it to the height offset. Now the height offset is a variable I made. I made it negative 0.021. We want to, this offset is used because if we don't have this offset, the zoom is going to be off by a little bit, or not necessarily. You could do a better job of the section you want to use, but for me it was off a little bit, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I have a default value in here of 0, then I have the zoom is correct, but the offset is wrong. I am way too far below where I want to see. So I just added this height offset to literally adjust the height. Now this part though, this is just dividing against our max height to make sure that the value is being mapped to the height we gave it earlier. We want the 0.58 because remember, changing this value, say we make it 1, is going to make it huge. And if we don't divide here, this will be a different result, of course. But we don't want to use this whole place as the height because then when it zooms, it's going to scale differently and it's going to be very large. So again, forget exactly 0.58. I was going to put 0.78. So you do that division to just make sure that you're working on the proper scale. Then we just do a texture sample, which I put in as my EKG, as my EKG sample. And I called it 2 just because I had another one before this that I didn't like as much. So just, you literally connect this to your texture sample node. You click on it, and then you can change the texture. Okay. And then the other part that was coming up from the section was the band that we generated, which is this fading, has to be multiplied by the actual texture. That way this texture can change the colors with the highlight. Some parts have more highlight, some parts have no highlight and or have faded, which is essentially all that's happening there. It's going from no fade to full fade. Make sure you multiply those together if you want that effect. If you don't need the fade, you can skip this part. And then this last part, Pedro, my good friend Pedro, the guy who created my intro, helped me out a lot with this, so props to him for that. So this part is using a panner, which this basically pans like a camera and chooses, this is a lot of what shows where this fade is at. Sure, this part here with this generate band and this texture sample multiply does a lot of the actual fading discoloration, but this panner is what moves the fade from left to right. So we're going to start with our texture coordinate again, just like we did the first time. I made a speed variable, which I made as 0.75. You can make this as fast as you want. If you make it 2, it's going to be really fast. It's going to look a little bit unnatural, but maybe if that's in your danger state. I'm going to switch it back to 0.75. And I'm multiplying by -1 here because if you just do this on a normal scale, it's going to go backward because it's actually going from light to dark. So you see where we want it to be the other way around. We want it to go from left to right. And that's all. So that's the only reason that's there. And then the texture coordinate goes into the coordinate on the panner. And then we just do the generate bands here, which I've already kind of gone over. These ones have a little bit more specific rules here to get this to work, but it's the same basic idea. So this generate band is doing the horizontal and vertical movement. We happen to turn off vertical movement. I basically just put a direction switch on true. And that's saying it's going to go only horizontal. Because if you take this away, it'll still work. And it actually looks pretty cool. But it's going to go left to right, and then there's this one you can see top to bottom. Top to bottom. So it looks pretty cool, but I don't think it fits exactly for what I was going for, so I decided not to use it. So you can just make a true boolean and put it in there. You can also skip this one entirely if you want. You just get a lot less fade. So basically it's all the standard color, and then you just have this brightness occurring, this sharpness going through with the panner. So you're not getting any of the fade, you just get a little bit extra color. I like the fade quite a bit, so I decided to keep it. And then here, this part specifically is for this line that is following it. So the display width is how far you want it to go. I chose 1 because 1 is the max height and max width, of this. So for example, if I make this 0.5, this is only going to go half the way. So you see how there's this massive area that is just blacked out. Instead of fading, it's just straight black. Well, obviously that doesn't look that good, so just keep it at 1. If you do need it bigger, you can make it bigger. If you see, then there's like no fade because it's too big, so it's not ever getting to the point where it's far enough away from this band that it is not being touched by it at all. So it's just got that kind of attenuation where it's getting weaker over time. If you make it too big, it just won't fade to black, kind of like what we saw with this one, if you were to remove this band. I have true again because, yeah, I only wanted it to go the one direction. You could have it going both. And then I called this scalar parameter fade effect amount, because if you were to cut this in half, then you'll see that it doesn't fade quite as much. So it's not that the width is different and that it's not being hit, but it doesn't really care about the value. It cares less about how much it should fade. So if you make this even less, you'll see it'll basically stay the same. See, it's just going from dark to light, whereas we want it to go from light to dark. Now the reason this is because this compare value compares by 0.5 by default. So without giving it this fade effect amount, 0.2 is less than that, so it's going from dark, or it's starting as light, and when this panner gets to it, it goes to dark. So you want a value higher than 0.5 and one that just looks good with what you're using. So if you make it too high, it's going to completely destroy it when the panner gets to it. So instead, 1. And there you go. You get a little bit of fade, and then you get your line right after it as well. Okay. Lastly, this is the color of the line. So right now you'll probably have a white line if you've been following this tutorial. And you're going to want it to be, you know, a certain color. So in this case specifically, we want it to be green. So all I do is I take the, you need to take the addition of the band of the panner information that you want. That way you have the lights and darks of, you know, how this panner is moving along, as well as the multiplication from the zoom and the section of the texture that you want to use. That way it's only going through this. And then you can multiply those together by the color of the line. So all you do to get this color node is you right click and type vector parameter. There we go. But this is basically just, this vector parameter is just a color node that you can assign red, green, blue, and alpha. I just passed the whole thing in there. You could probably do it one at a time, and you could probably skip the alpha as well. I think that might cause an issue. Well, we can try it right here. No, it actually doesn't cause an issue with the fade. Of course, the alpha doesn't have a color, but that's why I think you could skip it. But either way, I just passed the whole thing in there. And you can change this on the fly. So if you want it, all of a sudden you're like, I want blue. It's a nice blue color. So we'll use that for now because it's such a nice color. And then I just pass that into the final color. So this is the whole material blueprint. So if we go to our HUD now, I'll show you how to put this into your HUD. So you don't have to do anything in the graph. You'll see my graph is empty. But in your designer, I used an image, as you can see here. I have a health indicator background as well, but I'm actually not using it, so don't worry about that. I have an image that I dragged onto the screen right here, and I just called it health monitor health bar. And I'll show you here for reference. When you look at this, if you go to the appearance tab on the right in the details, you can actually go to the image. You can see that there's the basic EKG material there. And here it is, sorry. So here's the basic EKG material. That's all you do. If you set it to user interface in the material right here, in the material domain, then this will automatically allow you to use it as an image on the HUD. So if we save this, And there you go. If you reopen your editor, you'll see that it has worked now, and it shows you the actual image that you have, the actual dynamic material that you made, instead of whatever the screwed up one is that still is applied to this block after I put it. But you can see that you can also put it in the space even as a user interface material. So you can use it as either an object in the scene or an object on your character's HUD, and you'll get a wonderful little EKG, ECG, oscillator, whatever you want to call it. It's called a bunch of different things if you try and look it up how to do it online. So you can get a nice little instance there, and you can skip all the crazy ones that I made in the process of trying to make a heart monitor. So if you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, then I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe. I do programming videos every single week, so if you have any suggestions or any ideas that you want to see in action or implement in your game, let me know and I can help do them for you. Then it's like I'm working for you, but for free. Anyway, guys, I'm Shawnthebro. Thanks for watching my whole video, and I will see you next week. Bye, guys.